The screams pierced the night air as Garland Kerrigan awoke with a jolt, her bedroom already filling with acrid smoke that clawed at her lungs and stung her eyes. Through the window, the night sky had transformed into a hellish tableau of orange and red, flames dancing across the rooftops of Cottonwood Springs like demons unleashed from the underworld. It was 1873, and the small frontier town she'd called home for the past 3 years was being consumed by fire. Clutching her nightgown close, Garland scrambled from her bed, coughing as the smoke grew thicker. The boarding house's wooden floors felt hot beneath her bare feet as she grabbed her shawl and a small leather pouch containing her most precious belongings, the locket with her parents' portraits, the letters from her sister back east, and the meager savings from her work as the town's schoolteacher. The hallway outside her room was already an inferno, flames licking up the wallpaper and crawling across the ceiling. The heat was unbearable, pressing against her skin like a physical force. There would be no escape down the main staircase, it was already engulfed. Frantic, Garland rushed to the window, throwing it open and gasping as fresh air filled her burning lungs. 2 stories below, the town's main street was chaos. Men shouted, forming bucket brigades that seemed pitifully inadequate against the roaring flames. Women gathered children, pulling them away from collapsing structures. Horses whinnied in terror, some breaking free of their hitches and galloping wildly through the smoke-filled streets. "Help!" Garland cried out, her voice nearly lost in the cacophony of disaster. "Please, someone help." Through the swirling ash and embers, a lone figure on horseback emerged, guiding his mount skillfully between the burning debris. He looked up, spotting her at the window, his face partially obscured by a bandana pulled up against the smoke. Even from this distance, his eyes were startlingly clear, piercing blue against the orange glow of destruction. "Jump," he called, dismounting quickly and positioning himself beneath her window. "I'll catch you," Garland hesitated, clutching the window frame. The stranger below was tall and broad-shouldered, his stance confident despite the chaos surrounding them. His voice carried an authoritative edge that somehow cut through her fear. "The building's about to go, you need to jump now." A tremendous crack from behind her made the decision for her as a ceiling beam collapsed, showering the room with burning splinters. With a prayer on her lips, Garland climbed onto the windowsill and leapt into the smoky darkness below. Strong arms caught her, absorbing the impact of her fall. For a moment she was cradled against a solid chest, the rapid beating of his heart matching her own frantic rhythm. Then he was setting her on her feet, keeping a steadying hand on her arm. "You all right, miss?" he asked, his voice gruff but concerned. "Yes, she broke off in a fit of coughing, and he quickly pulled his canteen from his saddle, offering her water. "Name's Noah Lambert," he said as she drank gratefully. "We need to get clear of town, the dry goods store's fully stocked with kerosene and gunpowder." When it blows, as if summoned by his words, an explosion rocked the night, sending a fireball spiraling into the sky. Noah cursed, sweeping Garland into his arms and sprinting toward his horse. With surprising strength, he lifted her onto the saddle and swung up behind her, one arm securing her while the other took the reins. "Hold tight," he instructed, spurring the horse forward through the gauntlet of fire. Garland clutched the saddle horn, feeling the heat of the flames as they passed burning buildings. The horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, snorted in fear, but responded to Noah's commands with remarkable trust. They wove through the chaos, Noah occasionally shouting warnings to others fleeing on foot. As they reached the edge of town, Garland looked back. The schoolhouse where she'd taught was now fully engulfed, the church steeple collapsed in on itself, and the modest businesses that had represented Cottonwood Springs' growing prosperity were crumbling to ash. The town she'd come to love was disappearing before her eyes. "My students," she gasped, twisting in the saddle. "The children, most folks made it out," Noah assured her, his breath warm against her ear. "Sheriff Collins and the men from the saloon were getting everyone to the creek bed. That's where we're headed." They rode hard for another 10 minutes before reaching the shallow creek that curved around the eastern edge of town. Here, the townspeople had gathered bedraggled, soot-covered, and shell-shocked. Women comforted crying children, men stared grimly at the distant glow, and the elderly sat in stunned silence. Noah helped Garland dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. In the flickering light, she could finally see him clearly. The bandana had been pulled down, revealing a strong jawline shadowed with stubble. His face was striking rather than conventionally handsome, weathered by sun and wind, with lines at the corners of his eyes that hinted at both laughter and hardship. "Miss Kerrigan." A small voice broke the moment as Jenny Miller, one of her students, rushed forward and wrapped thin arms around Garland's waist. "We thought you were still in there," Garland knelt, embracing the child. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Are your parents here?" Jenny nodded, pointing to where her mother sat comforting her younger brother. One by one, Garland's students came forward, each face she recognized a small relief. But there were townspeople missing, and as the night wore on and the fire continued to consume Cottonwood Springs, the grim reality settled over the survivors. Sheriff Collins approached, his normally immaculate mustache now singed and his face blackened with soot. "Miss Kerrigan, thank God." "When we couldn't find you," he nodded respectfully to Noah, "Lambert thought you'd moved on." "Just passing through," Noah replied, his tone neutral. "Lucky timing." Garland looked between the two men, sensing an undercurrent of tension. "Do you know what started the fire?" The sheriff removed his hat, running a hand through sweat-matted hair. "Started at the livery, could have been a lantern knocked over, could have been deliberately set. Won't know till morning if then." "Deliberately," Garland echoed, horrified. "Who would do such a thing?" Neither man answered immediately, but Noah's jaw tightened and the sheriff looked away. "We've had some troubles with outlaws lately," Sheriff Collins finally admitted. "Nothing confirmed, but—" He trailed off, gesturing helplessly toward the burning town. "You should rest," Noah told Garland, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Dawn's not far off and there'll be work to do." Garland wanted to protest that she couldn't possibly sleep, but exhaustion suddenly crashed over her. The terror of the escape, the physical exertion, and the emotional shock combined to drain her last reserves of strength. Noah guided her to a small clearing where some of the women had arranged blankets. "I'll be nearby," he promised, and despite having just met him, Garland found herself trusting the quiet assurance in his words. As she settled onto a borrowed blanket, Garland watched Noah move among the survivors, offering water, helping an elderly man find a more comfortable position, speaking quietly to a group of men who appeared to be planning recovery efforts. There was something about him that drew the eye, not just his physical presence, though that was considerable, but a sense of contained capability. Sheriff Collins had seemed surprised to see him, and Noah had claimed to be just passing through. Yet he moved with the familiarity of someone who knew the town and its people. Who was Noah Lambert? And why, despite the tragedy unfolding around them, did Garland find herself so intrigued by this mysterious stranger who had carried her through fire to safety? With these questions swirling in her mind, Garland finally surrendered to exhaustion. The glow of the burning town casting long shadows over the huddled survivors as the night slowly gave way to dawn, morning brought no respite from the tragedy. Garland awoke to the smell of coffee brewing over small campfires and the murmur of subdued conversations. Her body ached from sleeping on hard ground, and her throat still burned from the smoke. Rising stiffly, she made her way to the creek to splash water on her face, trying to wash away the lingering ash. Cottonwood Springs was still burning, though the flames had died down considerably. In daylight, the destruction was starkly apparent, a blackened skeleton where a thriving frontier town had stood just yesterday. Garland's heart constricted at the sight. 3 years ago, she'd arrived from Boston with dreams of independence and purpose, answering an advertisement for a schoolteacher in a growing western settlement. Now, everything she'd built here was gone. "Coffee?" Noah appeared beside her, offering a tin cup of steaming liquid. In daylight, his features were even more striking. The blue eyes that had guided her through the darkness now revealed as the color of a summer sky, set deep beneath straight brows. His dark hair was tied back at the nape of his neck, and the stubble on his jaw had a reddish tint. "Thank you," she murmured, accepting the cup gratefully. "For the coffee and for last night, I wouldn't have survived if you hadn't been there." He nodded, a simple acknowledgement without false modesty. "Sheriff's organizing search parties. We need to look for survivors, salvage what we can." "Of course I want to help. Figured you would." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "The doctor mentioned you've helped him before. Medical training. My father was a physician. I assisted him often before." Garland trailed off, old grief momentarily surfacing. "I'm no doctor, but I know the basics. That'll be valuable today." Noah gestured toward where Dr. Abernathy was setting up a makeshift treatment area. "Some folks got burned pretty bad. Others breathed in too much smoke." Garland nodded, squaring her shoulders. "Work would help keep the shock and despair at bay." "What about you? What will you do?" Something flickered in Noah's eyes, determination, perhaps, or resolve. "Whatever needs doing." As the day progressed, Garland lost herself in tending to the injured. Burns, smoke inhalation, cuts from falling debris. The list of ailments was long, but, thankfully, most weren't life-threatening. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of Noah helping dig through smoldering ruins, comforting a child whose dog had run off during the chaos, conferring seriously with Sheriff Collins. By midday, the toll became clearer. 5 dead, including old Mr. Winters, who'd refused to leave his general store, and the Petersons' teenage son who'd gone back for their family Bible. 12 injured seriously enough to require ongoing care. And every single person had lost their homes and livelihoods. "We need to move the camp," Sheriff Collins announced as the survivors gathered for a meal of beans and dried beef provided from the saddlebags of those who'd been on horseback when the fire started. "Creek's too small here to support all of us for long. There's better water and shelter at Widow's Glen, about 5 miles north." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Widow's Glen had a reliable spring and enough grazing for the remaining livestock, but 5 miles was a long way for the elderly and injured to travel on foot. "I'll take 3 trips with my wagon," offered Harlan Green, whose farm lay outside of town and had been spared. "Can fit the worst injured and the old folks." "My horse can carry 2 at a time," Noah added. "I'll make as many trips as needed." Others with mounts made similar offers. Garland, who'd been kneeling beside Mrs. Abernathy checking bandages, stood and addressed the group. "We should inventory what supplies survived. Medicines, food, tools, anything that will help us rebuild." "Rebuild?" Thomas Reynolds, the banker, looked incredulous. "Miss Kerrigan, there's nothing left to rebuild. Cottonwood Springs is finished." "No place is finished while its people remain," Garland countered firmly. "This town didn't exist 10 years ago until people decided to make it exist. We can do that again." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd, and Garland felt a flush of embarrassment at having spoken so boldly. But when she caught Noah's gaze, the respect in his eyes bolstered her confidence. "Miss Kerrigan's right," Sheriff Collins agreed, "but first things first. Let's get everyone to Widow's Glen and take stock of our situation." The camp mobilized with surprising efficiency. Those who could walk began the journey immediately, carrying what few possessions had been saved from the fire. Green's wagon was loaded with the elderly and seriously injured, with Dr. Abernathy riding alongside to monitor their condition. Noah approached Garland as she was helping organize a group of women and children for the walk. "You should ride," he said. "You didn't get much rest last night." "I'm perfectly capable of walking," she replied, though her body protested at the thought. "Others need your horse more than I do." "Already made 3 trips with the little ones," Noah said, "and you're no use to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." "Besides," he added, a hint of that almost smile touching his lips, "Samson likes you." The chestnut stallion nickered softly as if confirming this assessment, nudging Garland's shoulder with his velvety muzzle. Despite herself, she laughed. "Well, if Samson insists, I suppose I must accept." Noah helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The simple contact sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the smoldering ruins nearby. He swung up behind her, one arm coming around to steady her as he took the reins with his other hand. "Hold on," he murmured, and Garland found herself leaning back against his chest as Samson began picking his way along the trail. For a time, they rode in silence, the rhythmic movement of the horse and the solid presence at her back lulling Garland into a state of weary contemplation. The events of the past 12 hours felt almost unreal, a nightmare from which she might still awaken to find her tidy room at the boarding house intact. "What will you do?" Noah asked eventually, breaking the silence. "After we get settled at the Glen, I mean." The question caught her off guard. In the immediacy of survival, Garland hadn't thought that far ahead. "I suppose I'll help with the rebuilding," she answered slowly. "I'm still the teacher, even without a schoolhouse. The children will need stability, a sense that not everything has changed." Noah nodded. She could feel the movement against her hair. "You're good with them. The kids saw how they flocked to you last night looking for reassurance. Children are resilient, but they need to know the adults in their lives haven't given up." Garland hesitated, then asked the question that had been circling in her mind. "What about you? Sheriff Collins seemed surprised to see you. Have you been away from Cottonwood Springs for long?" His body tensed slightly, almost imperceptibly. 2 years. "Wasn't planning on coming back, but I had business in the area." "What kind of business?" A pause. "The kind that's best not discussed." The cryptic answer should have alarmed her, but Noah's actions since the fire had revealed a man of compassion and integrity. Whatever his secrets, they didn't negate the fact that he'd risked his life repeatedly to help others. "Well, I'm grateful your business brought you back when it did," she said simply. "Not just for my sake, but for everyone you've helped since." His arm tightened briefly around her waist, a silent acknowledgement. As they continued toward Widow's Glen, Garland found herself wondering what lay beneath Noah Lambert's reserved exterior and why, despite the destruction of everything familiar, she felt a curious spark of anticipation for what the coming days might bring. Widow's Glen proved to be a blessing. Nestled in a natural hollow with the spring-fed creek running through its center, the area offered shelter, water, and enough flat ground to establish a temporary camp. By sundown, the entire surviving population of Cottonwood Springs had arrived, and crude shelters were being erected using salvaged canvas and branches. Garland worked alongside the other women, organizing what meager supplies they'd managed to save and preparing a communal evening meal. The mood was somber, but determined. Frontier life had taught these people resilience, and already discussions of rebuilding had begun. "We need to send riders to Fort Collins," Sheriff Collins announced as the camp gathered around the cooking fires. "Let them know what's happened, request supplies. Might be a military escort could help us transport materials back here for rebuilding." "I'll go," Noah volunteered immediately. "I know the fastest routes." The sheriff nodded, looking relieved. "Take Reed and Michaels with you, safety in numbers." Garland felt an irrational twinge of disappointment. Fort Collins was a 3-day ride each way at minimum. Noah would be gone for at least a week. The thought surprised her. Why should she care if this virtual stranger departed? And yet, the idea of him leaving created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. After the meeting dispersed, Noah sought her out where she was helping Dr. Abernathy reorganize his limited medical supplies. "We'll leave at first light," he said without preamble. "Wanted to make sure you'd be all right while I'm gone." The concern in his voice warmed her. "I'll be fine, we all will. The most seriously injured are stable now and everyone's working together." Noah nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "There's something you should know about the fire." Garland's hands stilled over the bandages she'd been rolling. "What about it?" "It wasn't an accident." His voice dropped lower, ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. "Sheriff confirmed it, found evidence of coal oil splashed on the livery walls, deliberately set." "But why?" Garland gasped, horrified. "Who would want to destroy Cottonwood Springs?" Noah's jaw tightened. "That's the business that brought me back. There's a man, Elias Blackburn, runs a gang that's been terrorizing small settlements across the territory. They burn towns, then his associates show up offering to buy the land cheap from desperate survivors. That's monstrous, Garland whispered, understanding dawning. And you think this Blackburn is responsible for our fire? I know he is. Noah's eyes hardened. Been tracking him for months. Got word he was headed this way, but I was too late to stop the fire. You're not just a cowboy passing through, are you? A ghost of a smile crossed Noah's face. Used to be, now I work for the territorial marshals, not officially, more of an arrangement between me and the chief marshal in Denver. The revelation should have been shocking, but somehow it made sense. The way Noah carried himself, the quiet authority in his manner, the respect Sheriff Collins had shown him despite apparent past tensions. Is that why you left Cottonwood Springs 2 years ago, to become a marshal? Noah looked away, his profile sharp against the fading light. No, left because I had to. Becoming a marshal came later. There was clearly more to the story, but Garland sensed now wasn't the time to press. Will you tell the others about Blackburn and the fire? Sheriff knows. No sense alarming everyone else yet. Noah met her eyes directly. But I wanted you to know you deserve the truth, and he hesitated. I need you to be careful while I'm gone. Keep your eyes open for strangers coming into camp. Anyone asking too many questions about rebuilding plans or land ownership. The intensity in his gaze made Garland's heart quicken. You think Blackburn's men might come here, even with everyone camped together? It's their pattern. They wait till the shock wears off, then show up offering help that comes with strings attached. Noah's hand moved as if to touch her face, then dropped back to his side. Just be watchful, I'll be back as soon as I can. I will, she promised. And Noah, be careful on the road. He nodded once, that almost smile appearing again. Always am, Miss Kerrigan. Garland, she corrected softly. After carrying me through fire, I think you've earned the right to use my given name. Garland, he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. Sleep well. Dawn comes early. As he walked away to prepare for the journey, Garland found herself watching his retreating figure, wondering about the man who had saved her life and now seemed determined to protect what remained of her community. There was much more to Noah Lambert than met the eye, and despite the circumstances, she found herself increasingly drawn to uncovering those hidden depths. The days following Noah's departure took on a rhythm of their own. Widow's Glen transformed from a hasty encampment to a more organized settlement. The men constructed sturdier shelters using salvaged timbers from the burned buildings and fresh-cut logs from the nearby woods. Women established cooking areas and washing stations along the creek. Children were assigned simple tasks to keep them occupied and give them a sense of purpose. Garland threw herself into creating normalcy for her students. Without books or a proper schoolhouse, she improvised using sticks to draw letters in the dirt, creating counting games with pebbles and organizing nature studies that took advantage of their woodland surroundings. In the evenings, she led the children in storytelling circles, encouraging them to express their feelings about the fire through tales of bravery and resilience. But beneath the facade of organized recovery, tension simmered. Food stores were limited, and hunting parties brought back less game than needed. The injured required ongoing care with dwindling medical supplies. And as the shock of survival gave way to the reality of their situation, conflict erupted over what should happen next. Cottonwood Springs is done for, Thomas Reynolds insisted during an increasingly heated community meeting 4 days after the fire. I say we disperse. Some can head to Denver, others to Cheyenne or Fort Collins. Trying to rebuild is throwing good money after bad. This is our home, countered Harlan Green, who'd lost his youngest son in the fire. My boy is buried here, I won't leave him. Sentiment won't feed your remaining children, Reynolds shot back. As the argument escalated, Garland caught Sheriff Collins watching the proceedings with a troubled expression. When their eyes met, he tilted his head slightly, indicating she should join him away from the crowd. Something's not right, he murmured when she reached his side. Reynolds was Cottonwood's biggest booster when times were good. Now he's leading the charge to abandon ship. People react differently to tragedy, Garland suggested, though she shared his unease. Reynolds had been unusually insistent, almost as if he had a personal stake in the town's dissolution. Maybe, or maybe Lambert was right about Blackburn's methods. The sheriff twisted his mustache thoughtfully. Keep an eye on Reynolds, see who he talks to. The suggestion that the banker might be collaborating with those responsible for the fire seemed far-fetched, but Garland agreed to be vigilant. That vigilance paid off the very next morning when she observed Reynolds in hushed conversation with two strangers who'd ridden into camp at dawn, ostensibly looking for work. The men claimed to be carpenters heading to Denver who'd heard about the fire and thought they might offer their services. Their story seemed plausible enough, but something about their manner set Garland's nerves on edge. They asked too many questions about property deeds and town charters, showed too much interest in who owned what parcels of land before the fire. When she mentioned her observations to Sheriff Collins, he nodded grimly. Lambert was right. Blackburn's vultures are circling. What do we do? Play along for now. Let them think we're considering their offer to help organize the rebuilding. The sheriff's eyes hardened. But post extra guards tonight. Something tells me these fellows didn't come alone. That night, Garland found sleep elusive. The makeshift shelter she shared with 3 other single women felt suddenly vulnerable, and every sound from the surrounding forest seemed magnified. When a hand clamped over her mouth shortly after midnight, she nearly screamed before recognizing the familiar blue eyes staring down at her in the darkness. Noah. He put a finger to his lips, then helped her rise without disturbing the others. Outside, the camp was quiet except for the posted guards visible at the perimeter. Noah led her to a small clearing just beyond the nearest shelters. "You're back early," she whispered, inexplicably pleased despite the circumstances. "Never left," he replied, his voice equally low. "Made it look like we did, but doubled back. Been watching the camp from the ridge. The strangers, I've seen them. Blackburn's men, sure enough." Noah's face was grim in the moonlight. "There are more in the woods, at least 10, maybe 15. Fear clutched at Garland's heart. "They mean to attack us, but there are women and children here, not their style. They want the land, not a bloodbath, but they'll use force if necessary to persuade everyone to leave." Noah took her hands in his touch steadying. "I need your help, Garland. We've got a plan, but it hinges on getting the most vulnerable members of the camp to safety without alerting Blackburn's men." Without hesitation, Garland nodded. "Tell me what to do." The plan was daring but simple. While Noah and Sheriff Collins dealt with the immediate threat, Garland would lead the women, children, and elderly through a hidden trail to a secondary camp that Michaels and Reed had been secretly preparing since the fire. "It'll be tight quarters but safer than here," Noah explained as he guided her along the trail they'd use. "Once Blackburn's men are dealt with, we'll bring everyone back." "Dealt with?" Garland questioned, suddenly afraid for him. "Noah, how many men do we have who can fight?" In the dim light, his expression was unreadable. "Enough. Sheriffs deputized some of the more capable men. We've been coordinating through Michaels. But you're still outnumbered." She clutched his arm. "There must be another way. We have the advantage of surprise." Noah's hand covered hers where it rested on his sleeve, and something worth fighting for. The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, sense the barely contained energy that seemed to define him. "You've risked so much for people who aren't even your neighbors anymore," she said softly. "Why?" Noah was silent for a long moment. 2 years ago, I left Cottonwood Springs because I thought I didn't deserve to stay. Did some things during the war I wasn't proud of, became someone I didn't recognize." His voice grew rougher. "Figured the town would be better off without me, but leaving didn't change anything, just meant I was running instead of facing up to who I'd been and who I wanted to become." "And who do you want to become?" Garland asked, her heart beating faster. "Someone worthy," he answered simply. "Of this place, of good people like those in that camp." His hand moved to her cheek, a feather-light touch in the darkness. "Of someone like you." Before Garland could respond, a bird call sounded from the direction of the camp, a signal. Noah tensed immediately. "That's Collins. They're making their move sooner than expected." He squeezed her hand once. "Go back, get everyone ready. When you hear 3 owl hoots, that's your signal to start moving people out. Stay on the path I showed you, don't stop for anything." Noah, she wanted to say so much, but there was no time. I'll find you, he promised, and then he was gone, melting into the shadows with a skill that spoke of long practice. Heart pounding, Garland hurried back to camp. The women had been quietly informed of the potential threat and the evacuation plan, and they mobilized with remarkable efficiency. Children were woken and comforted, essentials were packed, and the elderly were prepared for travel. They didn't have to wait long. Less than 30 minutes later, the silence was broken by shouting, followed by the distinctive crack of gunfire. Moments later, 3 owl hoots sounded the signal. Now, Garland whispered to Mrs. Green, who began ushering the first group toward the hidden trail. As they slipped away from camp, more shots rang out. In the distance, a man screamed in pain. Garland forced herself not to look back, focusing instead on guiding her charges safely through the darkness. Each step away from the camp was a step away from Noah, and the knowledge sat like a stone in her chest. The journey to the secondary camp took nearly 2 hours, with frequent stops for the elderly and young children. By the time they arrived at the crude but serviceable shelters Michaels and Reed had prepared, dawn was breaking. Garland helped settle everyone, her mind constantly returning to those left behind. Were they safe? Was Noah safe? As the sun rose fully, Reed appeared at the edge of the clearing, his arm bandaged but his expression triumphant. "It's over," he announced. "We got him." Most ran once they realized we were waiting for them, caught 3, including one of Blackburn's lieutenants. "Casualties?" Garland asked, her throat tight. "2 of theirs dead. On our side, Peterson took a bullet to the leg and Davis got grazed, but everyone's alive." Reed grinned. "Lambert says to tell you it's safe to bring everyone back, said to tell you specifically that he kept his promise." Relief washed over Garland, so powerful she had to sit down. Noah was alive. They'd prevailed. As she organized the return journey, she found herself hurrying the group along, eager to see for herself that he was unharmed. When they reached the main camp, the evidence of the night's conflict was clear disturbed earth. A few bloodstains, makeshift barriers erected at strategic points. Sheriff Collins was overseeing the restraint of 3 sullen men near the central fire pit. But Garland's eyes sought only one figure. She found Noah at the edge of camp, deep in conversation with Michaels. He looked exhausted, a smudge of dirt or gunpowder across one cheek, and his shirt torn at the shoulder but gloriously alive. When he saw her, he broke off mid-sentence and strode toward her, closing the distance between them in long steps. Before she could speak, he pulled her into an embrace that lifted her feet off the ground. For a moment, they clung to each other, public propriety forgotten in the relief of reunion. "You're all right," she breathed when he finally set her down, though he kept his arms around her. "When I heard the shooting, I told you I'd find you," he reminded her, his voice rough with emotion. His eyes searched her face as if memorizing her features. "Everyone get through okay?" "Yes, all safe. Reed told us what happened." She reached up, her fingers hovering near the tear in his shirt. "You're not hurt. Nothing worth mentioning." Noah caught her hand, pressing it against his chest where she could feel the steady beating of his heart. Garland, whatever he might have said, was interrupted as Sheriff Collins approached, looking grimly satisfied. "One of our guests decided talking was better than facing a hanging," he announced. "Confirmed everything you suspected, Lambert. Blackburn's been systematically targeting small settlements throughout the territory. Burns them out, then swoops in to buy the land cheap." "What does he want with the land?" Garland asked, reluctantly stepping back from Noah's embrace, though he kept hold of her hand. "Railroad's coming," Noah explained. "Route's not been officially announced, but Blackburn has connections in the surveyor's office. He knows which towns will be on the line, and he wants to own those properties when the railroad starts buying rights of way. Cottonwood Springs is one of those towns," the sheriff added, "which means rebuilding just became a lot more attractive proposition." The implications weren't lost on Garland. A railroad connection would transform their modest settlement into a vital link in the territory's growing transportation network. It would mean prosperity, growth, a future. "Does everyone know?" she asked. "About the railroad." "Telling them now," Sheriff Collins confirmed. Figure it might settle the debate about whether to rebuild or disperse. As word spread through the camp, the mood shifted palpably. Despair gave way to cautious optimism, then to determined planning. By midday, committees had formed to organize the rebuilding effort, inventory skills and resources, and draft a new town layout that would accommodate future growth. Throughout it all, Noah remained by Garland's side, offering insights when asked but mostly observing as the community found its footing. It was only late in the afternoon, when the initial excitement had settled into purposeful activity, that they found a moment of privacy near the spring. "You were right," Noah said as they sat watching the water bubble up from the ground, "about the town not being finished while its people remain. It's remarkable how quickly hope can replace despair when there's a purpose to work toward." Garland glanced at him. "Will you be leaving again?" Now that Blackburn's men have been captured, Noah was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the distant smudge of Cottonwood Springs ruins was just visible. "Blackburn himself is still out there. Part of me says I should go after him, finish what I started." Garland's heart sank, though she tried not to let it show. "I understand you have a duty." "Do I?" Noah turned to face her fully. "Been thinking about duty a lot these past few days, about what I owe and to whom." His hand found hers, strong fingers intertwining with her more delicate ones. "2 years ago, I left because I thought I didn't belong. Now I'm wondering if maybe I was wrong." Hope fluttered in Garland's chest, fragile as a newly hatched bird. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe my duty isn't out there chasing ghosts from the war. Maybe it's here, helping rebuild something worth having." Noah's eyes, so strikingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, held her steadily. "If there's a reason for me to stay." The question beneath his words was unmistakable. Garland's breath caught as she realized the choice before her to acknowledge the connection that had formed between them in the crucible of disaster, or to retreat behind the propriety that had defined her life as Cottonwood Springs schoolteacher. "There is," she answered finally, her voice soft but certain. "At least, I hope there could be." The smile that transformed Noah's face then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, sudden and brilliant and full of promise. Without another word, he leaned forward, his hand coming up to cradle her cheek as his lips met hers in a kiss that spoke of relief and longing and newfound hope. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Garland laughed softly. "Mrs. Abernathy will have a conniption if she saw that. She's convinced I'm destined to be a respectable spinster schoolmarm." "And what do you think you're destined for?" Noah asked, his thumb tracing the curve of her lower lip. Garland smiled, leaning into his touch. "I think destiny is what we make of it. And I'd like to make mine here, rebuilding something worth having." She echoed his words deliberately, "with someone worth having it with." As the sun began to set over Widow's Glen, casting long shadows across the temporary camp that would soon give way to a reborn Cottonwood Springs, Noah and Garland sat together by the spring, their futures no longer separate paths but a single road stretching toward the horizon. The fire that had consumed the town had forged something unexpected from the ashes, not just the promise of a community reborn, but the beginning of a love that neither had been looking for, but both had somehow found. In the weeks that followed, Cottonwood Springs began to rise anew. The railroad company, learning of the town's plight and eager to secure goodwill along its planned route, sent materials and workers to assist in the rebuilding. What emerged was not a replica of what had been lost, but something more deliberate, a town designed with growth in mind, with wider streets, dedicated fire breaks, and a central square that would eventually house a proper courthouse. Noah officially resigned his unofficial position with the territorial marshals, though he maintained connections that proved valuable as the rebuilding progressed. His knowledge of construction gained during the war when he'd served with the engineers made him an essential part of the planning committee. And if the townspeople noticed that he spent most of his free time in the company of their schoolteacher, they were wise enough to hide their smiles behind polite conversation about the weather. For her part, Garland threw herself into reimagining education in Cottonwood Springs. The new schoolhouse would be larger, with separate classrooms for different age groups and a small library annex that she was already collecting donations to fill. In the meantime, she conducted classes in a large tent donated by the Army, insisting that routine was essential for the children's recovery. 3 months after the fire, on a crisp autumn day when the aspen trees shimmered gold against the blue Colorado sky, Garland stood in the doorway of her nearly completed schoolhouse, admiring the craftsmanship of the large windows that would flood the space with natural light. "Will it do?" Noah asked, coming up behind her and slipping his arms around her waist, a liberty he now took frequently when they were relatively unobserved. Their courtship had progressed with a speed that might have scandalized Boston society, but seemed perfectly natural on the frontier where life's uncertainties made people less inclined to waste time. "It's perfect," she answered, leaning back against him. "Better than what we had before." "Seems to be a theme lately," he murmured against her hair. "Finding something better than what was lost." Garland turned in his embrace, looking up into the face that had become as dear and familiar to her as her own reflection. "Noah Lambert, are you being poetic?" "Trying to be," he admitted with a self-deprecating grin. "Not my natural talent. I don't know about that. You have many talents I've come to admire." She smiled teasingly. "Carpentry, horseback riding, kissing me senseless when no one's looking. That last one's my favorite." He demonstrated immediately, his lips finding hers in a kiss that still made her heart race despite its growing familiarity. When they parted, his expression had grown serious. "I have something to ask you, Garland." The tone of his voice made her pulse quicken. "What is it?" Noah reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that glinted in the autumn sunlight, a ring, simple but beautiful, a band of gold topped with a modest diamond. "Been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment," he confessed. "Then I realized there's no perfect moment except the one you make for yourself." He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love you, Garland Kerrigan. Love your courage and your kindness, your stubbornness when you believe in something, the way you look at the world and see possibilities instead of problems." Tears welled in Garland's eyes as Noah continued, his voice growing rougher with emotion. "I came back to Cottonwood Springs thinking I was just passing through. Instead, I found a home, found you." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hand. "Will you marry me? Be my wife, my partner, the mother of the children I hope we'll have someday?" "Yes," Garland answered without hesitation, joy bubbling up inside her like water from the spring at Widow's Glen. "Yes, Noah, I will marry you." His face broke into that sunrise smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into an embrace that lifted her feet off the ground, spinning her in a circle of pure happiness. Their laughter echoed off the new wooden walls of the schoolhouse, a sound of promise and future and love reclaimed from disaster. They were married a month later in the newly completed church, with Sheriff Collins giving the bride away and the entire population of Cottonwood Springs in attendance. Garland wore a dress sent by her sister from Boston, and Noah looked uncommonly handsome in a new suit that he complained pinched his shoulders but wore with good grace for her sake. The celebration afterward was a community affair, with tables groaning under the weight of potluck dishes and a makeshift dance floor constructed in the town square. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit around the perimeter, carefully supervised by the newly formed volunteer fire brigade, casting a warm glow over the festivities. "Mrs. Lambert," Noah murmured as they swayed together to the music of a fiddle and harmonica. "Still sounds strange to my ears, but I like it." "I like it too," Garland replied, her head resting against his chest where she could feel the steady beat of his heart. "Though my students insist on still calling me Miss Kerrigan, change comes hard for some. Speaking of change." Noah guided her away from the dance floor toward a more private corner of the square. "I have something to show you, a wedding gift of sorts." Curious, Garland allowed him to lead her to the edge of town where the rebuilding hadn't yet reached. In the growing darkness, she could just make out the outline of a structure she hadn't noticed before the beginning of a house, its framework rising from a stone foundation. Noah, she breathed, understanding dawning. Is this our home? He confirmed, putting an arm around her shoulders. Been working on it in the evenings. It's not much yet, but by spring it'll be finished. 2 bedrooms to start with, but room to expand as needed. He glanced down at her, a question in his eyes. Do you like the location? I chose it because it's close enough to the school for convenience, but has a view of the mountains from what will be our bedroom window. Garland turned to him, her heart so full it felt it might overflow. It's perfect, absolutely perfect. As they stood together in the gathering darkness, looking at the framework of the home they would build together, Garland thought about the night of the fire, how she had awakened to find her world literally in flames, how Noah had carried her through smoke and ash to safety. She could never have imagined then that such destruction would lead to this moment of profound happiness. What are you thinking about? Noah asked, noticing her introspection. About how life takes unexpected turns, she answered honestly. If the fire had never happened, you might never have returned to Cottonwood Springs. We might never have met. Noah was silent for a moment, considering. I've wondered about that myself. Can't say I'm glad the town burned. Too many people suffered for that, but I am grateful for where it led. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Some good can come from even the worst disasters, I suppose. More than good, Garland corrected, reaching up to touch his beloved face. Something miraculous. As he bent to kiss her, the distant sound of celebration drifted from the town square, a testament to the resilience of the community they now called home. Cottonwood Springs had risen from its ashes, transformed but undefeated. And in that transformation, 2 souls had found each other, a schoolteacher with dreams of building something meaningful, and a man seeking redemption who had carried her through fire to safety and, ultimately, to love. 5 years passed, and Cottonwood Springs thrived. The railroad had indeed come through, bringing commerce, travelers, and a steady stream of new settlers drawn by the town's strategic location and growing reputation for civic pride. The population had nearly tripled, necessitating an expansion of Garland's school to accommodate the influx of children. Noah had found his place as well, serving first on the town council and eventually as deputy sheriff, when Collins decided advancing age made him better suited to administrative duties than chasing outlaws. The skills Noah had honed during his time with the territorial marshals proved invaluable in maintaining peace as the town grew. Their home on the edge of town had expanded along with the community, a 3rd bedroom added when their son James was born 3 years after their wedding, and a 4th in anticipation of the child Garland now carried, her belly gently rounded beneath the loose dress she wore as she sat on the front porch swing, watching 4-year-old James attempt to teach their dog Rusty to shake hands. "Mama, he won't listen," James complained, his face a miniature version of Noah's, complete with the determined set of his jaw. "Patience, sweetheart," Garland advised, smiling at her son's frustration. "Rusty will learn when he's ready, not when you demand it." The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the road, where Noah was approaching on Samson, the chestnut stallion showing his age now but still proud and strong. Her heart did the same little flip it always did at the sight of her husband, even after 5 years of marriage. James abandoned his dog training efforts immediately. "Papa's home," he shouted, racing down the porch steps with Rusty barking excitedly at his heels. Noah dismounted smoothly, catching James as the boy launched himself through the air in a practiced move that never failed to make Garland hold her breath, despite the absolute certainty that Noah would never let their son fall. "There's my cowboy," Noah said, swinging James up onto his shoulders. "Have you been looking after your mama like I asked?" "Yes, sir. I brought her tea and didn't make noise during her rest time, and I helped with the gardening even though it's boring," James reported earnestly. "That's my good man." Noah carried James up the porch steps, bending carefully to kiss Garland. "And how's the mother of my children today?" "Better now that you're home," she replied truthfully. The morning sickness that had plagued her first pregnancy was thankfully absent this time, but fatigue still claimed her by mid-afternoon most days. How was the patrol? Noah set James down, instructing him to take Rusty and play in the side yard where they could be seen from the porch. Once the boy was happily engaged in a game of fetch, Noah sat beside Garland on the swing, taking her hand in his. Quiet, thankfully. Johnston's boy found some tracks up near Eagle Creek that had him concerned, but they turned out to be from Jenkins' cattle that broke through the fence again. He rubbed his thumb over her knuckles in a habitual gesture of affection. Town's growing so fast, though. Collins is talking about hiring another deputy. Is he now? Garland raised an eyebrow. Anyone in mind, thinking of asking Michaels. He's got a good head on his shoulders, and he's been wanting something more stable now that he and Sarah are expecting their first. Garland smiled, remembering how Noah and Reed had conspired to introduce the shy Michaels to the equally reserved Sarah Miller, the town's seamstress. The match had been unexpected but successful, and the upcoming baby was a source of considerable excitement in their circle of friends. I think he'd be excellent, she agreed, and it would mean you could be home more regularly. That's the primary appeal, Noah admitted, his free hand moving to rest gently on the curve of her stomach. Don't like leaving you, especially now. The tender gesture warmed Garland's heart. Noah had been an attentive husband from the beginning, but impending fatherhood had brought out a protective streak that was both endearing and occasionally smothering. During her pregnancy with James, she'd finally had to ban him from the schoolroom after his constant hovering had disrupted her lessons. "We're fine," she assured him. "Dr. Stevens says this pregnancy is progressing perfectly, and James is a wonderful helper." At the mention of his name, James looked up from his game with Rusty, waving to ensure his parents had noticed his expert throw of the stick. Noah waved back, a smile softening his features in a way that was reserved solely for his family. "Been thinking," he said after a moment, his voice casual in a way that immediately alerted Garland that whatever followed was anything but casual, "about making some changes." "What kind of changes?" she asked, curious but not alarmed. After 5 years together, she'd learned to read the nuances of Noah's moods. Collins mentioned he's thinking of retiring next year, hinted pretty strongly that he'd recommend me as his replacement. Noah looked out over the yard, watching James rather than meeting Garland's eyes. Being sheriff would mean more responsibility but also more regular hours, no more overnight patrols unless there's an emergency. Garland squeezed his hand encouragingly. "You'd make an excellent sheriff, Noah. The town respects you. It's not just about the job." Now he did look at her, his expression serious. "Been thinking about our family, about what kind of legacy I want to leave for James and this little one." His hand moved in a gentle circle over her belly. "My father was never around much, always chasing the next opportunity, the next town, the next dream, never put down roots anywhere." "And you're afraid of becoming like him," Garland guessed, understanding dawning. For all Noah's confidence in most areas of his life, fatherhood had awakened old insecurities rooted in his own childhood. Not afraid, exactly, just determined to be different. Noah's eyes, still that striking blue that had first caught her attention on the night of the fire, held a rare vulnerability. "Want our children to have what I didn't: stability, certainty, a father who's present." Garland reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that 5 years had added around his eyes, lines of laughter more than worry, testament to a life lived fully and well. "Noah Lambert, you are already a wonderful father. James adores you, and this baby will too. But if becoming sheriff would give you peace of mind, then you have my full support." Relief softened his features. "Thank you. Still need to think it through, talk to Collins more about the details, but knowing you're behind me makes the decision easier." "I've been behind you since the night you carried me out of a burning building," Garland reminded him with a smile. "That's not likely to change now." Noah leaned in to kiss her, a gesture that still sent a flutter through her heart despite its familiarity. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers for a moment, a position of intimacy they'd shared countless times over the years. "Best decision I ever made, turning back to Cottonwood Springs that night," he murmured, "even if I didn't know it at the time." For me as well, Garland agreed, thinking of how differently her life might have unfolded if not for the fire that had seemed like the end of everything but had actually been a beginning. A shout from James interrupted the moment, his excited voice carrying across the yard. "Papa, Mama, look." "Rusty did it, he shook my hand." They turned to see their son beaming with pride as Rusty obligingly offered a paw, tail wagging furiously. "Well done, James," Noah called back. "Told you patience would pay off." As they watched James lavish praise on the delighted dog, Garland felt a familiar sense of contentment settle over her. This life they'd built together, this home, this family, this love had emerged from the ashes of disaster, forged in fire and tempered by shared purpose. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd first come west as an idealistic young teacher, but it was immeasurably richer, deeper, and more fulfilling than anything she could have planned. "What are you thinking about?" Noah asked, echoing a question he'd posed many times over the years of their marriage. Garland smiled, leaning against his shoulder as they watched their son play in the yard of the home they'd built together in a town they'd helped rebuild from ruin. "I was thinking about how sometimes the things that seem like endings are actually beginnings in disguise," she answered honestly. "And how grateful I am that my beginning included you." Noah's arm tightened around her shoulders, drawing her closer. No words were needed. After 5 years together, they could read each other's silences as clearly as any spoken declaration. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long, golden rays across their front porch, Garland Kerrigan Lambert reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a night of terror and destruction to an afternoon of profound peace and satisfaction. The flames that had consumed Cottonwood Springs had burned away the old to make room for the new. And in carrying her through smoke and ash to safety, Noah Lambert had not only saved her life, but set them both on a path to a happiness neither could have imagined amidst the ruins of what once was. It was, Garland thought as she rested against her husband's solid strength, watching their son's joyful play, the most beautiful kind of phoenix story, not just a town reborn from its ashes, but two hearts finding in devastation the beginning of something indestructible.